Hey everyone, welcome to the channel and I hope you're doing well. If you're new to Unfortunate Ends, what we do is talk about crime, mystery and other things, so if you're interested, be sure to stick around. Anyway, let's jump into today's case. Chico Mendes was an environmental activist and conservationist from the Amazon region in Brazil in the 1970s and 1980s. His complaints about deforestation of the Amazon and advocacy of sustainable use of the region's resources had garnered national and international attention. But in 1988, he was assassinated. Here we explore his work and ask who and why might have killed Mendes. Francisco Alves Mendes Filho was born on the 15th of December 1944, outside the town of Chapuri, in the state of Acre in the far west of Brazil. This is a region deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. It is closer to the border with Peru and the Pacific Ocean than it is to the developed cities of Brazil on the west coast. Here he grew up as the son of a member of the so-called Robber Army, the name which in 1943 was given to tens of thousands of Brazilians who were recruited in the poor northeastern parts of Brazil to go and live here in the wilds of the Amazon. Their mission was to tap rubber in the rainforest, as it was badly needed by the United States and the other Western allies for use in the war effort against Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan. Brazil had stepped into the breach and hired families like Mendes's to relocate to the rubber-producing regions in the Amazon. But when the war ended, many families such as Mendes's never returned to the more developed parts of the country in the east. Francisco, who later became known as Chico, as an abbreviated form of his Christian name, began rubber tapping himself in the Chapuri region when he was just 9 years old. Many of the communities which were entrenched here in the 1950s and 1960s developed sustainable ways of tapping rubber, and also growing crops and other products such as nuts, oils, fruit and fibres. However, as Brazil's economy developed in the post-war years, they were increasingly challenged by bigger development agencies who wanted to cut down large sections of the Amazon for wood and to clear the region to produce farmland for cattle. By the 1960s, this was leading to resistance movements within the Amazon. On the surface of it, Chico did not seem like an obvious leader of this movement. He did not learn to read and write until he was 18 years of age, but when he did, he threw himself into local activism, campaigning for schools to be set up in the Chapuri region and helping to establish a branch of the Socialist Workers' Party in the district. In 1975, the Rubber Tappers Union was set up, with Mendes as its first secretary. As his work expanded, it also grew more concerned with the wider issue of preserving the Amazonian rainforest, rather than simply sustainable rubber tapping. By the 1980s, Mendes had come to international attention, and the Environmental Defense Fund and the National Wildlife Federation even brought Mendes to the United States in March 1987 to address the US Congress in Washington about the need to preserve the Amazon rainforest. This was a period when governments were becoming concerned about the risk of climate change and the hole which had been discovered in the ozone layer. And because of this, Mendes's campaign was gaining traction. But then, as he was becoming a focal point both internationally and within Brazil itself for the Amazonian conservationist movement, he was tragically murdered towards the end of 1988. On the 22nd of December 1988, Chico Mendes was shot and killed by a single gunshot blast outside his home in Chapuri. He was just 44 years of age. But his assassination did not come as a striking surprise to his family and supporters. Chico had received many death threats in recent years. These were anonymous for the most part, but it was clear to see that they were sent by individuals whom Chico's activism had hindered in some way. There was a lot of money to be made in cutting down the rainforest, or in using the land in unsustainable ways. Everyone from miners to road builders to cattle farmers stood to make money from the exploitation of the Amazon, but Chico's activism and campaigns was threatening all of that. Indeed, Dozens of other conservationists like Mendes had been killed in Brazil in the months leading up to his own assassination. Additionally, there was a worrying development in the weeks leading up to his murder. For months, armed gunmen had been seen in the Chapuri region around his house. These had been deployed here by various business interests as a way of threatening and intimidating Chico and his followers. But in the days prior to his murder, it had been noted that these gunmen had disappeared. Rather than being relieved, Chico and his family viewed this as an ominous sign that something more sinister was about to happen. The question was, though, who had killed Mendes? There were numerous suspects who had motives to have Chico murdered. Many of these were business owners who were interested in further exploitation of the Amazon region. One of these was Ovidio Roberto. He was a senior contributor to a scheme to establish a multi-million-dollar dam on the Rio Grande River, which pours through the Amazon. Chico had loudly complained about the environmental damage that this would cause in the region. Roberto thus had a cause to want Chico out of the way, as he would profit handsomely if the dam project went ahead. Another man with local business interests that were being compromised by Chico's campaigns was Fernando Cavalera, a local crop farmer. He was looking to expand his land holdings in the area, but he was widely suspected of using lots of pesticides and fertilizers on his crops, which were polluting the local rivers. Chico had drawn attention to this, so Cavalera had reason to want him silenced. Similarly, Aldebio da Silva was the owner of a local logging company. Chico had recently discovered that da Silva was cutting down much more woodland than he was illegally allowed to, and was smuggling the same out of the country for a handsome profit. So perhaps he killed Mendes to avoid him further interfering in his illicit business dealings. Then again, da Silva was only a small timer compared with Franco Quadros, another person suspected of being involved in Mendes' death. Franco was the head of the Quadros Mining Company, a major business involved in the deforestation of the Amazon. It was conceivable that Quadros might have hired somebody to kill Mendes, as the conservationist had become a major problem in impeding his business. Some of those suspected even reached as high as the cabinet of the Brazilian government. A lot of people believed that the Minister for the Economy, José Fernandes, had orchestrated the killing in an effort to remove Chico from the area and silence a critic of Fernandes's policy of exploiting the region in order to accelerate the Brazilian economy. The minister had links to Franco Quadros, and it could have even been possible that the pair had acted in unison. Others who came under suspicion were simply people who had reasons to be disaffected at their own personal plight. One such was Francisco de Sousa, a local peasant farmer who had become disgruntled of late as a result of being forced to move home to a new farm as a result of a logging company taking over his old allotment. De Sousa had little grudge against Mendes, but he was in the near vicinity at the time that the murder occurred, and was suspected because he had taken to drinking heavily around the time that Chico was killed. Similarly, a middle-aged construction worker by the name of Luis Franco had a personal grudge against Chico. Franco had a large family of 6 children, but he and his wife were very poor, as Franco had been out of secure employment for several years in the early to mid-1980s. He had finally obtained secure employment of late, working on road construction in the region. These roads were being built by the logging and mining companies, whose activities Chico was campaigning to stop. If these campaigns had been successful, it would have threatened Franco's livelihood yet again, and he needed the job because one of his children was quite sick, and the medical bills were expensive. So, could he have murdered Mendes in an effort to save his job and protect his family? Finally, there was Dali Alves. Alves was a local cattle farmer who had clashed with Mendes on several occasions over Chico's efforts to prevent him cutting down more of the Amazon to make way for grazing land for his cattle. He and some of his wider family, such as his son Darcy, became the prime suspects in the case early on, and they were soon being honed in on by the police. Eventually, Darley and his son Darcy, and an associate of theirs by the name of Jardier Pereira, were arrested and charged with Mendes' murder. But there was a widespread belief that they had either not been responsible, or that if they were the ones who conducted the assassination, they had done so with the complicity of others, with links to more powerful business interests in the region, and even the Brazilian government. These suspicions were compounded by what happened next. At their trial, Darcy Alves was accused of having fired the fatal shot, and his father and Pereira of having assisted him. All three were found guilty in December 1990 and sentenced to 19 years in prison, but the verdict was quickly appealed. As a result, they managed to gain a retrial, but the convictions were upheld, and the three served out their prison sentences, albeit while briefly escaping from prison in 1993. The leniency of the sentences, the escape in 1993, and the fact that they were granted a retrial in 1992 all raised suspicions that elements within the government, police and judiciary were told to try and make the sentences as light as possible, or even overturn them. Consequently, to this day, there is a lingering suspicion that the Alves family and Pereira were simply figureheads for a wider conspiracy of individuals who wanted to have Mendes removed from the scene. If there was a conspiracy which reached into the higher echelons of the Brazilian government and business world, it did not have the desired effect. Chico's assassination actually galvanized support for the cause of environmentalism and sustainable development within the Amazon region. Local cooperatives which engaged in sustainable development were set up in the early 1990s, and increased attention to the issue saw a decrease in exploitative development for some time. In recognition of his work in stimulating the conservation movement in the country, Mendes has been named as the patron of the Brazilian environment. However, the increased attention given to the conservation and sustainable development in the Amazon region only lasted for a brief period. Today, Mendes' struggle and the resistance it provoked is an all too common feature of the Amazonian region, for the simple fact that rampant deforestation and exploitation is occurring there. Since the start of the 21st century, Brazil has accounted for half of the murders of environmental campaigners and activists such as Mendes worldwide, and the deforestation problem continues to get worse. Each year, tens of thousands of acres of the Amazonian rainforest and jungle are cut down in Brazil to make way for further agricultural land and development. As a result, the Amazon region, which has been termed the lungs of the earth for their role in regulating carbon dioxide levels, is actually being turned into a net carbon emitter. This is occurring at precisely the time when humanity needs to be preserving and expanding great natural expanses such as the Amazon to tackle the existential risks posed by the climate emergency and biodiversity crisis. Consequently, Chico Mendes' life and his beliefs have never been more relevant and important. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Chico Mendes. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyed the video. If you did, leave me a like and a comment down below. Let me know who you thought murdered Mendes down in the comments as well. And if you're new, why not subscribe? Make sure to have notifications turned on so you get all my videos as soon as I upload them. And anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next unfortunate end. Thanks.